Listen closely. Can you hear it? That sound like silk being torn underwater? That's the exact frequency at which a man's sovereignty dissolves. I discovered this truth at 3:47 a.m., sitting in a room that smelled of burnt coffee and dying roses, reading Schopenhauer by candlelight while somewhere in the distance a couple argued about mortgage payments. The old pessimist was right about one thing. We are puppets dancing to strings we cannot see, and the puppeteer wears lipstick. Picture this. A man walks into a casino. Not the gaudy kind with neon lights and desperate tourists, but the invisible casino that opens its doors the moment he notices how her laugh makes his chest tighten. The house always wins, they say. But what they don't tell you is that the house doesn't need to cheat. It simply waits for you to bet everything on red, while convincing yourself you're playing for love. In the summer of 1823, a Prussian merchant named Wilhelm Hoffmann kept a diary. Historians found it wedged behind a false panel in his study, pages yellowed like old teeth. He wrote, "She speaks and I become smoke. She frowns and I become stone. Yesterday I was a man with opinions about trade routes and tobacco prices. Today I am a creature who exists only in the reflection of her eyes." 6 months later, Wilhelm had liquidated his business, abandoned his scholarly pursuits, and died chasing her shadow through the streets of Berlin during a particularly brutal winter. They found him frozen, clutching a love letter he never sent. But here's the delicious paradox that would make Kierkegaard choke on his communion wine. The siren doesn't sing because she's evil. She sings because that's what sirens do. A scorpion stings not from malice, but from nature. And we swim toward the rocks, not because we're stupid, but because something in our DNA mistakes drowning for transcendence. Modern research confirms what folklore has always whispered. A 2024 study from the Institute of Behavioral Dynamics found that men in the throes of romantic obsession show decreased activity in the prefrontal cortex, the same region that atrophies in gambling addicts. Love, it seems, is just another word for voluntary lobotomy. The researchers, bless their clinical hearts, called it cognitive submission through romantic idealization. I call it signing your execution warrant with a smile. You know what nobody talks about? The moment of clarity that comes 3 seconds too late. Like when you're falling from a building and suddenly remember you're afraid of heights. I've seen men, brilliant men, men who built empires and solved equations that made God nervous, reduced to whimpering children because she didn't text back. They'll tell you it's about connection, about finding their other half. But Aristophanes was drunk when he wrote that myth, and we've been getting drunk on it ever since. Here's a story they don't teach in philosophy classes. Schopenhauer himself fell in love once. Carolyn Richter, an actress 17 years his junior. He wrote her letters that contradicted everything in his essays, letters full of hope and yearning and all the things he claimed were illusions. She left him for a banker. He spent the rest of his life perfecting his pessimism, like a man sharpening a knife he'd already used to cut out his own heart. The air in my room tastes like iron and regret now. Outside, that couple has stopped arguing. The silence is worse. It's the silence of surrender, of someone choosing comfort over dignity, choosing the familiar cage over the terrifying freedom of solitude. We all know this silence. We've all been complicit in creating it. Let me tell you what the siren's contract really says, buried in the fine print beneath all those promises of eternal love and breakfast in bed. In exchange for the illusion of completion, you hereby forfeit your right to exist as a sovereign being. You will mistake dependency for intimacy. You will call your cage a home. You will defend your captor with the passion of a religious convert, and when friends try to wake you, you will hate them for disturbing your beautiful nightmare. The contract is written in disappearing ink, visible only in hindsight, like those magic eye pictures that reveal their secrets only when you stop trying to see them. And the cosmic joke? We queue up to sign it. Generation after generation, each convinced we'll be the exception, each certain our love is different, deeper, more real than the billions of failed attempts that came before. Tell me something, listener. When was the last time you made a decision, a real decision, that wasn't calibrated to someone else's approval? When did you last enjoy your own company without feeling the phantom limb of another's presence? The candle on my desk is dying now, wax pooling like small white tears. In its flickering light, I can almost see old Schopenhauer smirking from beyond the grave, vindicated but taking no pleasure in it. After all, being right about human misery is its own kind of curse, but perhaps that's the first step toward liberation, recognizing the contract for what it is. Not love's promise, but love's prison. Not connection, but cosmic comedy. The siren will always sing, and men will always swim toward the rocks. But maybe, just maybe, one or two will remember to bring earplugs, or better yet, learn to enjoy the silence. Every relationship is a performance where both actors forget their acting. She wore his loneliness like perfume. He wore her needs like a noose. Together they waltzed in a burning room, each pretending they had something to lose. The poem came to me in a fever dream, scrawled on my arm in ballpoint pen because I couldn't find paper in the dark. When I woke, my skin was stained with backwards words, mirror writing like Leonardo's notebooks. Fitting, really. Everything in love is backwards. We say, I need you, and mean, I need me. We say, you complete me, and mean, you distract me from my incompleteness. But tonight, let's talk about the grand performance, shall we? The elaborate theater where every man becomes Hamlet and every woman becomes Ophelia, and somehow everyone drowns in the end. I once knew a photographer, let's call him Marcus, who spent his life capturing truth in frozen moments. Wedding photography paid the bills, but his real work happened after midnight in his dark room, developing pictures that nobody would ever buy. Pictures of empty chairs, abandoned houses, the spaces between things. He understood negative space the way monks understand silence. Then he met her at a gallery opening. She collected broken things, vintage cameras that couldn't take pictures, watches that couldn't tell time, men who couldn't love properly. Within 6 months, Marcus had transformed. His apartment, once a sanctuary of solitude and strange art, became a stage set for their relationship. Every surface curated, every corner arranged for her approval. He even started taking different photographs, sunsets and flowers and all the pretty lies that sell well on Instagram. I'm happier now, he told me over whiskey that tasted like liquid regret. But his hands shook when he said it, and his eyes had that peculiar emptiness you see in method actors who've been in character too long. Here's what Nietzsche understood that modern relationship coaches don't. We don't fall in love with people. We fall in love with the role they allow us to play. She wasn't a woman. She was his chance to play the savior. He wasn't a man. He was her opportunity to play the muse. And round they went, trapped in a script neither of them wrote, but both of them memorized. The Stanford Psychology Review published something fascinating in 2024. They studied couples' communication patterns using AI analysis and found that after just 3 months together, people begin unconsciously mimicking not just each other's speech patterns, but their entire personality architectures. We literally lose ourselves, neuron by neuron, gesture by gesture, until we become pale copies of each other, shadows dancing with shadows. But the real horror, we call this intimacy. In medieval Japan, there was a form of theater called No, where actors wore masks so elaborate they became the character. The tradition held that if an actor wore the same mask too many times, his face would grow to match it. When he finally removed the mask, he'd find his own features had vanished, replaced by the wooden expression he'd been wearing. Every relationship is a no play, and we're all wearing masks we can't remove. I keep a photograph on my desk, not of anyone I loved, but of a mirror I found in an antique shop. The silver backing had deteriorated in places, creating gaps in the reflection. When you looked into it, parts of you simply weren't there. The shopkeeper said it was damaged, worthless. I paid him triple what he asked. It's the most honest mirror I've ever owned. Because that's what happens in the theater of shadows, isn't it? Parts of you start disappearing. First, it's small things. The way you used to spend Sunday mornings, the friends who wouldn't understand, the books she finds pretentious, Then, larger pieces vanish. Your opinions that make her uncomfortable, your dreams that don't include her, your solitude that feels like betrayal. You don't notice the erasure happening. It's like carbon monoxide poisoning. Odorless, tasteless, and by the time you realize you can't breathe, you're already too weak to open a window. Marcus called me last week, 3 a.m., drunk on wine that costs more than my rent. She'd left him for an investment banker who collected the same broken things but had better insurance. "I don't know who I am anymore," he whispered into the phone. "I look at my old photographs and they feel like someone else's work. I try to take new ones, but my hands don't remember how." The theater of shadows demands total commitment. No understudies, no intermissions, no breaking character. And the audience? The audience is just you, watching yourself perform happiness while your authentic self suffocates in the wings. Schopenhauer wrote that life is suffering, but he was only half right. Life is suffering because we insist on auditioning for parts in plays we don't even want to be in. We contort ourselves into shapes that please others, speak lines that taste like ash in our mouths, take our curtain calls while dying inside. So here's my question for you. Wrapped in velvet and dipped in poison, what role are you playing right now? And more importantly, if the curtain fell tonight and the audience went home, would you even remember who you were before the show began? The candle has burned down to nothing now, leaving only the smell of smoke and endings. In the darkness, I can hear the city breathing, all those millions of actors in their private theaters, performing love for each other, performing happiness, performing everything except authenticity. But perhaps there's strange comfort in knowing we're all in the same tragedy. At least we're not dying alone. We're dying in pairs, in groups, in grand ensemble casts that would make Shakespeare weep. Tomorrow, Marcus will buy a new camera. He'll try to remember how to see the spaces between things. Most likely he'll fail. Most likely he'll find another broken thing collector and start the performance all over again. But tonight, in this moment between acts, there's a terrible freedom in admitting that the show must not go on. Validation is a drug that requires ever-increasing doses until the overdose becomes inevitable. There's a plant in the Amazon called the strangler fig. It starts life as a tiny seed in the canopy, dropped by a bird onto a host tree. Slowly, invisibly, it sends tendrils down, wrapping around the trunk with what looks like an embrace. The host tree continues growing, unaware it's being hollowed out from inside. By the time the fig's grip becomes obvious, it's too late. The host dies, leaving only a hollow lattice of fig roots standing where a tree once lived. I'm telling you this at 4:17 a.m., speaking into the darkness like a madman at confession, because I just watched a man become a strangler fig's ghost, and his name was me. But let me back up. Let me tell you about the hunger. It starts innocently. A text message with a heart emoji. Your chest tightens, just slightly, like someone tuning a guitar string. Dopamine whispers its little prayer. You've been chosen, noticed, valued. For approximately 11 seconds, you exist. Then comes the silence between texts. The hunger notices. Kierkegaard called it the dizziness of freedom, that vertigo you feel when staring into the abyss of your own choices. But he never lived to see the read receipt, that little digital confirmation that you've been seen and deemed unworthy of response. He never experienced the exquisite torture of watching someone's typing indicator appear and disappear, like Morse code spelling out your worthlessness. The University of Melbourne released a study in January 2025 that should have been printed on black paper and bound in human skin. They found that people in romantic relationships check their phones an average of 96 times per day, with each check lasting about 23 seconds. That's 37 minutes daily spent genuflecting at the altar of validation. But here's the part that made me laugh until I cried. The anxiety between checks increased exponentially with each validation received. The more she responded, the more her silence burned. Let me tell you about Anthony. Brilliant anthropologist, spent years studying isolation rituals in Tibetan monasteries. Could meditate for hours, Subsist on rice and water. Find profound meaning in silence. Then he met her on a dating app. Swipe right on enlightenment. Swipe left on sovereignty. Within 3 weeks, this man who once found God in emptiness was refreshing his phone every 30 seconds, analyzing response times like they were sacred texts. She usually texts back within 5 minutes, he told me, his voice shaking like an addict explaining dosage. It's been 17 minutes. Something's wrong. Something was wrong, all right, but it wasn't her response time. The hunger grows according to its own terrible mathematics. First, you need her good morning text. Then you need it by a certain time. Then you need it with the right emoji. Then you need the emoji plus a pet name. Then you need all of that plus a voice note. Then a video. Then constant reassurance that you're special, different, not like the others. Even though you're acting exactly like all the others, performing the same desperate dance for the same diminishing returns. I have a confession that tastes like copper pennies and shame. I once spent 6 hours crafting the perfect casual text. 6 hours to write, "Hey, thinking of you." I analyzed every word like a Talmudic scholar. Hey versus hi. Which sounded more confident? Should I include her name? Was the period too aggressive? By the time I sent it, I'd aged a year and lost the ability to remember why I'd wanted to text her in the first place. She replied with K. That's when I understood what Schopenhauer meant when he wrote about the will being a blind, irrational force. We're not seeking love. We're seeking evidence that we exist, and we've confused attention with existence. Every notification becomes a little hit of ontological proof. I am seen, therefore I am. But here's the cosmic punchline that makes the gods choke on their ambrosia. The more validation you receive, the more you need. It's a hunger that feeds itself, growing stronger with every meal. You become a validation vampire, and she becomes both your supplier and your addiction. There's a medieval manuscript in the Vatican Library that describes a demon called the Validatus. It doesn't possess you violently like in the movies. Instead, it whispers sweetly about your worth, your specialness, how much you're loved, but only when others are watching. When you're alone, it goes silent, leaving you with a terrible suspicion that you might not exist at all. We're all possessed by the Validatus now, carrying it in our pockets, charging it nightly like a digital familiar. Anthony's story ends the way all these stories end, in a kind of living death. She left him for someone who didn't need constant reassurance, someone who could exist between text messages. He spent months analyzing their chat history like an archaeologist excavating his own grave. Look, he'd say, showing me screenshots. Here's where she started using fewer exclamation points. This is where it began to die. But it began to die the moment he started needing her responses to feel alive. Listen carefully now, because this is the part where I grab you by the shoulders and shake. What would happen if you turned off your phone for 72 hours? Not airplane mode, not do not disturb, completely off. Can you even imagine it? Or does the thought make your chest tighten like a closing fist? The room smells like old paper and resignation now. Somewhere in the distance, a phone buzzes against a nightstand, someone else's fix arriving right on schedule. The sound makes me think of insects trapped in amber, forever frozen in the act of reaching for something they'll never quite grasp. But perhaps there's a strange salvation in recognizing the hunger for what it is. Not love, not connection, but a kind of digital cannibalism, where we devour each other's attention until there's nothing left but the endless, gnawing need for more. The strangler fig doesn't know it's killing its host. It's simply following its nature, reaching for the light by any means necessary. The question is, are you the fig, or are you the tree? Or have you been hollowed out so long you can't tell the difference anymore? Memory is the cruelest gift. It preserves what destroys us. Shh, lean closer. I'm going to whisper something terrible. Every man carries a graveyard in his chest, and the headstones all bear her name. It's 9:30, that liminal hour when insomnia becomes philosophy, And I'm sitting here surrounded by things I should have thrown away years ago. A ticket stub from a concert we left early because she was tired. A wine cork from the night she said she loved me. She was lying, but the wine was excellent. A photograph where we're both smiling at nothing. Already ghosts pretending to be alive. The ancient Egyptians believed memories lived in the heart, which is why they left it in the body during mummification. Everything else could go. Brain, liver, lungs. But the heart stayed, heavy with its collection of moments. They understood what we've forgotten. Memory isn't stored in the mind. It lives in the body, in the flinch when you smell her perfume on a stranger, in the way your hand still reaches for her side of the bed at 3 a.m. Let me tell you about the Garden of Dead Roses, the place where every man eventually finds himself wandering. It starts with just one rose. You plant it the day she leaves. Water it with whiskey and self-pity. This pain means it was real, you tell yourself, as if suffering were a receipt for love. Then you plant another, the memory of her laugh. Another, the way she looked in morning light. Soon you have a whole garden, and you spend your nights there, pruning and maintaining these dead things, convinced that letting them die completely would mean losing the only evidence you ever mattered to anyone. I knew a pianist once, Jerome, hands like prayer, soul like a bruise. He'd been one of those prodigies you read about, playing Carnegie Hall at 15, recording albums that made critics weep. Then came Elena. She loved his music, she said, loved how his fingers moved across the keys like he was casting spells. When she left him for a hedge fund manager who couldn't tell Chopin from chopsticks, Jerome stopped playing. Not dramatically. Not all at once, just stopped. But here's where it gets interesting. He didn't destroy his piano. He turned his entire apartment into a shrine to their relationship. Her coffee mug still sat by the kitchen sink. Her toothbrush still stood in the holder like a tiny monument to morning routines that would never repeat. I'm preserving it, he told me, gesturing at the museum of their dead love. If I keep everything exactly as it was, maybe what? Maybe she'll walk through time backwards? Maybe the universe will take pity and press rewind. He never finished the sentence because even delusion has its limits. But we all do this, don't we? We become curators of our own suffering, archivists of absence. We save text messages like holy scrolls. We revisit photographs like pilgrims returning to shrines. We water our dead roses with tears and call it healing. A neuroscience lab in Copenhagen published something devastating in 2024. They found that painful memories are literally addictive. The brain releases the same endorphins when revisiting traumatic romantic memories as it does during runner's high. We're not just holding on to the past, we're getting high on our own heartbreak. Suffering becomes our last connection to meaning, and we mainline it like junkies who've confused withdrawal with wisdom. Nietzsche wrote about the eternal return. The idea that we're doomed to live the same life over and over, every joy and every agony repeated infinitely. But he was wrong about one thing. We don't need cosmic recurrence. We create our own eternal returns every time we walk through the garden, touching each dead rose, rehearsing conversations that will never happen, winning arguments that ended years ago. There's a Japanese word, tsondoku, for buying books and never reading them, letting them pile up unread. But there should be a word for what we do with memories. Collecting them, displaying them, never quite processing them, just letting them pile up in the heart until we can't breathe for all the beautiful garbage we're hoarding. Here's a secret that tastes like grave dirt and moonlight. I still have a voicemail from someone who swore she'd love me forever. It's been 4 years. Forever lasted 8 months, but at 3 a.m., when the world tastes like ashes and possibility, I play it. Not because I miss her. I don't even remember what her face looked like when she wasn't lying. I play it because the pain is familiar, and familiarity feels safer than the terrifying emptiness of moving on. Jerome called me last month. He'd finally hired someone to clear out Elena's things. The cleaning lady found a letter wedged behind the piano, Elena's real goodbye, the one she never sent. In it, she confessed she'd never really loved his music. It reminded her of her father, who'd forced her to take piano lessons. She'd loved the idea of loving a musician, but the reality made her feel like a child again, powerless and performing. "I wasted 3 years watering a garden for someone who was allergic to roses," he laughed, but it sounded like glass breaking in his throat. "So, here's my challenge, whispered like a curse or a blessing. Go to your garden right now. Pick one dead rose, just one. The text thread you read when you can't sleep. The photo you've hidden in that secret folder. The gift you can't throw away. Pick it up, hold it to the light. Then ask yourself, is this memory keeping you warm, or is it keeping you from building a fire? The candle is just a puddle of wax now, reflecting nothing. In its dying light, I can see my own garden spreading before me, acres of carefully maintained grief. Each dead bloom perfectly preserved, each thorn still sharp enough to draw blood. But sometimes, in the strange honesty that comes with exhaustion, I wonder what would happen if we just stopped gardening. Let the weeds take over. Let the roses turn to dust. Let memory do what memory wants to do naturally. Fade, blur, become story instead of scripture. Jerome started playing again last week. Not the old pieces, the ones she pretended to love. New compositions that sound like someone learning to breathe underwater. They're terrible. They're beautiful. They're alive. Maybe that's the secret. Dead roses can't bloom, no matter how faithfully you tend them. But if you're brave enough to clear the garden, something else might grow. Something that doesn't require her ghost to survive. Solitude is not the absence of love. It's the presence of self. The wolves are howling again, but tonight they sound like monks chanting vespers. I've been awake for 37 hours, subsisting on black coffee and the strange electricity that comes from finally understanding something that's been clawing at your skull since birth. My hands are shaking as I write this, not from caffeine, but from the terrible ecstasy of revelation. We've been running from the wrong monster all along. There's a monastery in the mountains of Georgia, not the American state, but the ancient country where they say wine was invented and hearts were first broken. The monks there take a vow of silence that lasts not for years but for lifetimes. They believe words are what separate us from God, that every conversation is a small betrayal of the infinite. Tourists think they're crazy, but I've seen their eyes, and they burn with something that makes romantic love look like a candle flame next to a forest fire. Let me tell you the most dangerous truth I know. Every man's greatest love affair should be with his own solitude. But we're terrified of this, aren't we? We call it loneliness, paint it as pathology, medicalize it with dating apps and productivity seminars and the constant, desperate need to be choosing or chosen. Schopenhauer knew better. He wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom. For it is only when he is alone that he is really free." The old bastard was sitting on dynamite, and he knew it. I want to tell you about two men. The first was Richard, a surgeon who could rebuild hearts but couldn't find his own. He went from relationship to relationship like a medical student going from cadaver to cadaver, each one teaching him more about anatomy, but nothing about life. He collected women the way some people collect stamps, carefully, categorically, always looking for the next rare edition. The second was Thomas, a lighthouse keeper on an island off the coast of Maine. He'd been married once, briefly, to a woman who couldn't understand why he preferred the company of storms to dinner parties. When she left, taking half his savings and all his faith in partnership, he didn't replace her. Instead, he learned the names of every bird that passed his lighthouse. He wrote letters to no one and burned them in the lamp, sending smoke signals to a god who might or might not be listening. Guess which one died happy? The Behavioral Science Institute of Vienna just published a study that should be required reading in every school, tattooed on every young man's arm. They followed 10,000 men for 15 years, tracking their relationship patterns, happiness indices, and what they called authentic self-expression markers. The men who spent at least 2 years in deliberate solitude, not loneliness, but chosen aloneness, showed 73% higher rates of what researchers termed existential satisfaction. They were more creative, more resilient, more genuinely confident. They didn't need validation because they'd learned to validate themselves. But here's what the study didn't say. What it couldn't say without being burned as heresy. These men had discovered the Monastery of One. It's not a place, but a state of being. In the Monastery of One, you wake at whatever hour your body chooses. You eat when hungry, not when she's ready for dinner. You read books that would bore her, think thoughts that would scare her, become versions of yourself that don't require witness or approval. You discover that the voice in your head, the one you've been drowning out with conversation and compromise, actually has something profound to say. Last week, I met Richard at a bar that smelled like formaldehyde and failed dreams. He was on his 7th relationship, or maybe 8th. He'd lost count. "This one's different," he slurred, the exact words he'd used about the last 3. "She really gets me." "What's her name?" I asked. The pause lasted 17 seconds. I counted. Meanwhile, Thomas sends me postcards from his lighthouse. The latest one just said, "The storms are teaching me to sing. Badly, but with conviction." On the back was a sketch of a bird I couldn't identify, and beneath it, "Neither can I." That's the point. You see, the Monastery of One isn't about hating women or fearing intimacy. It's about recognizing that you cannot give what you do not have. You cannot love from emptiness. You cannot share a self you've never met. Every relationship you enter from a place of incompleteness is doomed to become a mutual parasitism. 2 empty vessels trying to pour into each other, creating nothing but the sound of hollow clanging. In ancient Tibet, there was a practice called dark retreat. Monks would seal themselves in caves for months, sometimes years, in complete darkness. No light, no sound, no human contact, just the self, meeting itself without distraction or excuse. Many went mad, but those who emerged spoke of finding a light inside themselves that made the sun seem dim by comparison. We don't need caves anymore. The modern world provides plenty of darkness, but we need the courage to sit in it, alone, without immediately reaching for our phones or our exes or the next warm body to convince us we exist. Here's my final question, the one that will follow you into your dreams tonight. If you stripped away every relationship, every role, every external validator of your worth, if it was just you in the mirror at 4 a.m., would you like the man staring back? Or would you run from him like you've been running your whole life? The wolves have stopped howling now. Dawn is breaking like a promise or a threat, painting the world in shades of possibility. I can hear the city waking up, all those millions of people fleeing their solitude, checking their phones, scheduling their distractions, running from the beautiful terror of their own company. But somewhere, Thomas is watching the sun rise over an empty ocean, perfectly alone, perfectly complete. He's learned the secret that would make Schopenhauer weep with joy. Solitude isn't the consolation prize for those who can't find love. It's the prize itself. The Monastery of One has no doors because it needs no doors. You're already inside. You've always been inside. The only question is whether you'll stop trying to escape. Richard will text his maybe girlfriend whose name he can't remember. He'll suggest brunch, suggest forever, suggest anything except the revolutionary act of being alone. He'll die as he lived, surrounded by people, utterly lonely, never understanding the difference between loneliness and solitude. But you could choose differently. You could discover that the greatest love story ever written is the one between a man and his own existence. You could learn that every moment spent in genuine solitude is a love letter to the self you're becoming. You could enter the Monastery of One and find that it's not a prison. It's a palace. And you've always held the key.